This is the Octavia project update. Welcome. Hopefully some number of you out there are already running Octavia, or at least looking at running it, or looking at contributing. So we'd always love some more contributors. So I'm Adam Harwell. I go by RM Work. I'm at GoDaddy. And Michael Johnson, our PTL, wasn't able to make it to this summit, but he helped out with the slides, so shout out to him as well. So Octavia, our nice brand new mascot there, thanks to the OpenStack team. So what are we? We are network load balancing as a service. We have a lot of buzzwords here. We're scalable, on-demand, self-service, technology agnostic, but the key here is that we do load balancing. So our reference driver is a service VM model, which is designed to do a highly available load balancer that at least eventually, and I'll talk about this on the Queen slide, will scale with your compute environment. Or it scales with your compute environment. Hopefully it will scale more than that. So we were founded during the Juno release. We have a number of contributors from a number of companies. And we were originally a Neutron sub-project, so maybe some of you use Neutron LBaaS. But we split off and became a top-level project as of Okada. And as of the last 2 years of April OpenStack user surveys, we were the #1 feature for Neutrons people interested in using. So people said LBaaS was their highest priority, and thank you for that if you fill out the user survey. So just looking back at Pike, Pike was actually a really good release for us. The #1 thing we did in Pike was we got our native LBaaSv2 API implementation done. So if you're able to run Octavia as of the Pike release, you can actually completely skip Neutron LBaaS and now go directly to Octavia. The API should be completely compatible. So if you were using Neutron LBaaS before, you should just be able to point directly at Octavia. And that includes RBAC support and everything required to just be a full front-end API. We've also updated our API reference docs. So I know that was one of the larger complaints that people had previously while we were in the transition between Neutron LBaaS and Octavia. The docs were a little bit out of date, but now we have a nice brand new shiny set of V2 API docs. So you should be able to reference those and really get going. So of interest to some would be we added a new pool protocol. So there's protocols on kind of two sides. We have listener protocols and pool protocols. Listener protocols are things on the front end, which are going to be like HTTP, HTTPS, terminated TLS, or like TCP. But on the back end, after the traffic has been processed, we can do some additional stuff now. So we can use the PROXY protocol. If anyone's familiar with that or isn't familiar with that, it's basically allows to add an additional like header to pass on information like the original requester IP and port, which can get lost, especially if you're using HTTPS pass-through. So this allows a backend node that understands how to handle proxy protocol to get that information without us having to mangle the headers of like an HTTP request. Or for things that aren't HTTP, like SMTP for mail servers, it allows us to forward that information on. So that's a nice add. Also of interest, if you were using the HTTPS health monitor type prior to Pike, technically that wasn't performing a real health check. That was just doing a quick TLS hello like handshake and making sure that it would do that, but it wasn't actually checking like the status or the body of the request. We've moved that old functionality to TLS hello type, and you can now use the HTTPS type and it will actually perform a real health check. Caveats on that are if you do like client cert auth, this won't work, so you might still have to use TLS hello. But for the most part, it should just start working. We also added monitor address and port for members. So previously, before Pike, your health monitors would always hit the address and port of the member, the same as the client. But now you can specify a separate address and port. So if you wanted to hit like a monitoring service, or you had another application running on that server that you were using to actually do more complex monitoring, you can direct to that instead of just the main service. And we finished our client plugin. So as of Pike, finally we have a full client in OpenStack client that will let you hit Octavia. Prior to that, you had to go through the Neutron client, which has been deprecated for a while. So we're really happy to be off of that and onto our own client that will let you hit Octavia directly. And I think that uses, if you've deployed Octavia as of Pike and you have the V2 API enabled, you should just be able to have a Keystone endpoint for that with type load-balancing, and the client should just work. So that actually brings me to some of the deployer improvements. So we can actually deploy the Octavia API now as a WSGI application. Prior to that, it was a little more like we just had a standalone Python thing. But now you should just be able to shove it under Gunicorn, UWSGI, Mod WSGI, whatever you want to use to deploy, which is, I think, was part of the general OpenStack goals for Pike. So that works for us as well. We added configuration options for a number of things. For Nova, you can now specify the availability zone that you want to deploy our Amphora, our service VMs in. And you can select an anti-affinity policy. So prior to Pike, we defaulted, or the only anti-affinity policy was hard anti-affinity, which meant if the scheduler couldn't handle that request, it would fail, and the load balancer would go into error. Now, at least you can set soft anti-affinity. Hard is still the default, but you can set soft, and if it will try, it'll make a best effort to do anti-affinity, and if Nova can't do that, at least you'll still get something. And that's configurable for your deployment, as well as disabling TLS termination in the API. So a lot of people, I know right now we rely on Barbican for our TLS termination. There were a number of deployers who don't run Barbican and so didn't have a way to utilize that. And so it's a little less confusing for users if it's just disabled instead of being confused as to how it's supposed to work and why the APIs are returning bad values. You can also disable specific API versions. So like I said, we now have our V2 API supported directly in Octavia. Prior to Pike, it was the V1 Octavia API, which was how Neutron LBaaS talked to Octavia. But with V2 now, if you're deploying and using V2 as a standalone API, you should probably disable V1. And I think that is actually the default now. If you're deploying under Neutron LBaaS still, you can disable V2 and just enable V1. So that's configurable, as well as the Amphora build rate concurrency. So we had some concerns about that running away if people were, or if suddenly there was really high utilization, or during some like certain edge cases, like when you first spun up, if you had a very large spares pool, now it will limit the rate at which we'll build those. So it's a little more friendly. So moving on to Queens. So we actually have some pretty good goals for Queens this time. We're looking to finally get our provider support natively. So that would mean right now, if you're using like F5 or A10 or VMware or Radware or whatever appliance, those are plugins to Neutron LBaaS. Octavia doesn't yet support doing that natively. So if you're running those, you still have to run Neutron LBaaS. But Hopefully by the end of Queens, we'll have support for those vendor drivers, so you can run Octavia, use the V2 API through Octavia, and have it provision you stuff through the appliances. And along with that is flavor support, which actually means you could have multiple vendor drivers running at the same time. So you could have like a flavor for F5 and a flavor for VMware, for example, if people really had a preference for some reason, or you could have a software flavor and a hardware flavor, or even just for Octavia's service VM stuff, you could have a small or large flavor to allow you to do like a small memory footprint or a large memory footprint Amphora if you have a larger workload or if you're doing TLS termination. We're also looking to get active-active in. The spec, I believe, has finally merged. I hope I'm saying that right, but we're looking to actually get the work on that done by the end of Queens to get some basic active-active support. So right now, we recommend deploying an active-passive or active standby topology, but yeah, very soon, hopefully, we have a couple kinds of active-active coming down the pipeline. So that'll be really good. We also have really improved Horizon dashboard support for Octavia. So we actually do have an Octavia dashboard project. As of right now, it is in master. It is actually talking directly to Octavia. Previously, it still kind of went through Neutron LBaaS. But now it goes through Octavia. We've got a number of bug fixes to address some of the community notes that we've heard, and there's more coming. So we've got some people actively working on that now. I think some of them might be in this room. And also an expanded admin API. So now there is an API that will let you fail over an Amphora manually if you really need to, either for debugging purposes or testing or any number of reasons. There's an API that'll let an admin go and do that, as well as an API to give you a little more visibility into the VMs that are behind any given load balancer. That's the Amphora API. So you can actually see, like, for this load balancer, what Amphora or what VMs are running behind it. So you can do, again, a little bit more troubleshooting. And also, the last thing, I think, this is actually already merged in Queens, into master, and will be in Queens, which is the ability to update all members of a pool in one API call. So we call that batch member update. So one of the biggest use cases people had for us that they couldn't do prior to this was, like, my members is a constantly shifting list. I don't want to try to keep track of what I'm taking out or what I'm putting in at any given point. I just want to say, these are my members, and now you can do that, and we'll handle that intelligently. So it's a lot faster. You don't have to delete one, wait, add one, wait, add one, wait. Like, just makes that a little bit easier for users. Yeah.
How does the swap happen? Like, you give the new list, and then, like, the members continue working?
So what we do is we take the new list. We actually do a sort of comparison internally to see which ones already exist and which ones don't. But actually, when we go set the config in the service VM for HA proxy, we actually do it. We just generate all at once the new list. So the new config goes right in all, like, just instantaneously. There's no delays where, like, you have less member count or anything. It's straight from one to the next. So it's a lot more efficient. So yeah, beyond Queens, some of our long-term goals, a lot of this has come from the community, is auto-scaling is something that a lot of people would like to see, and we're hoping we can get that after our active-active support is done. Log offloading, so you can have some centralized logs, or you can give logs to users, like their HA proxy connection logs, so that they can see what's going on with their applications and for troubleshooting purposes. And honestly, a lot of people just, when they say, hey, something's not working, there's a good chance it's on the app side, but it's hard to prove without being able to see that. So it's a good tool as an operator for you to be able to say, hey, look at that, and you can see exactly what's going on. So that's something we've got some plans for. We'd like to get that in at some point. UDP load balancing, I think there might be people working on that now even. It's just that it's not a priority for us in Queens, but I think there's some chance that we could see that. As well as improved TLS cipher and protocol support, so you could actually specify like a blacklist or a whitelist for that. We still have to discuss exactly how that would go. And then TLS re-encryption on the back end is something that we've wanted for a long time, but just hasn't been a high priority. But that would allow people to a lot more safely use TLS termination so they could use the more advanced features of the load balancer, but not risk having their traffic unencrypted on the back end between the load balancer and the member nodes. So we've got a little bit of cross-project work going on. One thing is we are switching, hopefully in Queens, I think the patch is about to merge that will allow us to use PKCS12 TLS cert files instead of all of the individual files that we use right now. And that'll use Castellan directly for that retrieval, which will support a lot more backends. So I know like Vault, for instance, is coming very soon for Castellan Vault support, and Custodia, I think, as well. Also, we're still trying to work out container support for our compute driver. We have a Nova LXD patch that's been in progress for a while. We were waiting for some bug fixes, but that should be pretty close to ready. And we're looking at Neutron Firewall as a Service integration because there's some concern right now about the backend members have to allow kind of a sort of open policy to allow traffic through, because the possible IP range is basically all of your compute environment for the ingress for that. So we're looking at a way to maybe integrate with Firewall as a Service to let that happen in a more secure way. So kind of boilerplate slide, how to contribute and give feedback. We have our IRC channel, OpenStack LBaaS. We have weekly IRC meetings every Wednesday at 2000 UTC. That's now, our meetings are now in our channel. So we moved from the meeting channels to just having our meeting in our channel. We have our new docs up. Our code is up there on GitHub or Garrett, and we've already moved to Storyboard. So if you were looking for our Launchpad page, bug page, that's not there anymore. We are fully migrated to Storyboard. So please put in bugs, feature requests, whatever there. So I know we're almost out of time, but does anybody have any questions? Yes?
So have you ever considered to support global load balancing or out of scope of Octavia?
Yeah, so the question is support for global load balancing. That's kind of out of the scope for Octavia. We're looking to position Octavia for just like intra-DC load balancing. Of course, we support just any IP address as a backend member. So if the traffic will flow, you can do that. That might be slow, right? Because you're going to have to go into, like, say, one DC and out to somewhere else. But I mean, we've looked at global load balancing, or I've looked at global load balancing, and I know there is another project that was spun up to look for that, and Michael is going to be upset with me because I can't remember the name of it right now. Cosmos, yes, thank you. So yeah, OpenStack Cosmos is the global load balancer project. I don't know how far they've gotten, but they're working on it there. Anyone else? Cool. Well, everybody go have a good lunch. If you are interested, actually, I finally got Octavia stickers. So if you'd like one, come talk to me. I can give you a sticker after this. So thank you.